I want to clear up some misconceptions on the Electoral College. I was recently in a live chat panel discussion with a couple other creators. Shout out to Trip on the Clock app. If you don't follow her already, she does a great job hosting these things. And we got to talking about the Electoral College and the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact. If you don't know what that is, it's where states are signing an agreement saying that they will give their electoral votes to whoever wins the popular vote, not who wins their state. A bunch of states have signed on, like my home state of Minnesota, and a bunch of other states are considering it. And if we get enough states, the idea is that we no longer have to worry about the popular vote not electing the president. And the reason this is needed is because the Electoral College, the thing that actually elects our president, gives a lot more voting weight to less populous states. For example, California, which is the most populous state at a whopping 39 million people, controls 54 electoral college votes. That breaks down to around 720,000 people per electoral college vote. But Wyoming, on the other hand, which is our least populous state, gets a minimum of 3 electoral votes because that is the minimum. That's the way they wrote the rules. They only have 580,000 people in that whole big-ass state, which breaks down to 200,000 people per electoral college vote, which means one single vote in Wyoming is worth about 3.5 times a single vote in California. Hell, if Wyoming only had 1 electoral vote, it would still be worth more than 1 vote in California. The other reason this would be needed is because almost all the states, with the exception of 1 or 2, is a winner-take-all system for their electoral votes. Which means if 51% of the people in your state vote for Donald Trump gets 100% of your state's electoral college votes. And that's the reason that a candidate can lose the popular vote, but still win the presidency through the electoral college. Because winning a few key states, like say Pennsylvania and Wisconsin and Michigan, by just a few hundred votes gives you all of that state's electoral college votes. And you might be wondering why we have this incredibly stupid system, right? Did you guess racism? If not, you should have, because racism is right. That's the right answer. The Electoral College was designed to give less populous slave states more power in selecting the president. Otherwise, free states would have had the ability to outvote them every single time. It was literally designed to tilt the scales in favor of races, and it still does that. It hasn't changed in its design or function. But in this live panel, one of the creators was arguing that we should keep the Electoral College because it's good, with the only argument I've ever heard in favor of the Electoral College, because there's really no good arguments in favor of it because, you know, it's stupid. And that argument is that the Electoral College gives a voice to smaller states that would otherwise be ignored on a presidential scale. The people genuinely making this argument are arguing it because their team will perpetually lose if they lost the Electoral College, and then to win elections, they might be forced into actually having to do something, like their job. Because literally the only reason to support the Electoral College is because your policy sucks so bad that the only way you can win is by having the scales tilted in your favor. But the argument that people try to use to justify keeping it is that it gives the little states a voice. You know, it keeps the coastal elites from running the country, and that's a dumb fucking argument. First off, as it stands right now, nobody's paying attention to fucking Wyoming or North Dakota anyway, even with this incredibly stupid system that we have. But you know who else they're not paying attention to is Texas and California and Minnesota. In fact, they barely pay attention to any states. They really only pay attention to Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Florida, right now Georgia and Arizona. It's usually 7 to 10 states, you know, swing states, the one that can swing either way and decide the election. And because of the Electoral College, if your state isn't a swing state, nobody gives a shit about you at all. And if you don't live in a swing state and you don't vote the way that your state votes, your vote doesn't even get counted. It doesn't matter at all. It gets thrown out. Theoretically, I mean, it gets counted. It's just, it's useless because 100% of your state's electoral college votes go to the way that the state voted, and you didn't vote that way. So your vote is meaningless. This means the 30% of Republicans in California and the 40% of Texas Democrats don't get a voice at all in the presidential election. And most presidential candidates aren't going to try to court their votes because their votes don't matter. And that's a big deal. Like, did you know that there is more Republicans in California than there are in Texas? In fact, there was almost 1 million more Trump voters in California last election than there was in Texas. So the Electoral College takes everybody's voice away unless you live in a few select states. But if you get rid of it, then presidential candidates not only have the motivation to, but have to court every voter in every state. Now that 30% of Republicans in California and that 40% of Democrats in Texas are a huge voting bloc you can use to get over the finish line. And on top of that, if we want a third-party candidate, this is the only way to give them a chance. Because as it stands right now, a third-party candidate could go pick up 3 million votes in California, 1 million votes in Texas, another million in Florida. They could go pick up a couple 100,000 from Iowa Iowa and Wyoming, a few million in New York, and they could cross the finish line right now with tens of millions of votes and get 0 electoral college votes because they didn't win a majority in any of those states. But with the popular vote, all of those votes that third-party candidate picked up would count towards their potential win. And because there's a ton of disenfranchised voters around the country, that gives a third-party candidate the opportunity to go after the people who are normally ignored. And because of that, everybody would receive more representation, every voter would have more of a voice, and every voter's value would be worth the same amount. And then we would never have to worry about somebody winning a presidential race by 3 million votes and losing the presidency. And that's all why the Electoral College has to go, and that's why any argument against it is ridiculous. There is absolutely no good argument for it. Not one. It is a literal, insurmountable barrier to a third party. It makes millions and millions and millions of Americans' votes irrelevant, and it allows total losers to be winners. So now that we can all agree that the popular vote is the best thing for everybody, and we all want that, right? Remember that there's only one party that keeps losing the popular vote and winning the presidency. And if we allow them to do that again, it's probably a pretty good assumption that they aren't going to be super sympathetic to allowing us to move forward with that popular vote thing we all want, because it'll make all of our voices heard. Democrats, Republicans, independents, it will make all of our voices heard. But to do that, we need to get that passed. And unfortunately, there's only one party that is going to do that. And it ain't going to be the one led by the guy who's never won a popular vote in his life, except for the one time it resulted in 34 felony convictions. Choose wisely, guys. Do the thing that's better for all of us.